The last video focused on the initial aims of Britain and Italy during the Second World War's North Africa campaign. We left off at Operation Compass, when the British, under General Archibald Wavell, outmaneuvered and defeated the Italian 10th Army, sweeping through Libya, passing Benghazi, and capturing over 130,000 Italian troops. The operation concluded on the 7th of February 1941, when the British reached El Agheila. The Italian army was in shambles, and their objectives to advance into Egypt seems to have failed. Mussolini appealed to Germany to help salvage the situation, and realizing the extent of the Italian losses, Hitler issued Directive 22 on the 11th of January 1941. The new German Afrika Korps under Erwin Rommel began to arrive later on the 11th of February in Operation Sonnenblume, meaning sunflower. Rommel himself arrived on the 12th of February and the 21st Panzer Division on the 14th. The arrival of the German reinforcements scrapped the emerging prospect that the North Africa campaign would conclude quickly, and it changed from a colonial conflict to yet another part of the escalating World War. The theatre continued to tie in more and more countries, including the United States, all whilst the French, collaborator or not, watched tentatively from the West. This video will go over the German, American, and varying French aims of the North Africa campaign in order to conclude this brief series. The aims of Germany were fairly straightforward. They entered North Africa to support their Italian allies and prevent Britain from gaining control in North Africa and the southern Mediterranean. For Hitler, the campaign took a back seat to what he saw as the real objective throughout the entire war, the conquest of Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, to destroy Bolshevism and gain living space for the Aryan race. This contradicted Grand Admiral Erich Raeder's emphasis on a Mediterranean strategy, where the Axis advances through to the Middle East towards Turkey, who would be surrounded by Axis allies, or captured territory and forced to join them. The Soviet Union would have even more heat on their border from this, and be easier to deal with, and a potential enemy, Turkey, will be neutralised. Defeating Britain, which was the main focus for Raeder, would also be accelerated, as India would be threatened and her oil supply would be disrupted. Hitler mostly dismissed these aims, having instead a longer-term goal of moving towards Iran to threaten the Soviet Union from the south, focusing Germany's efforts in North Africa towards defeating the USSR. There was also a contingent of high command with nostalgia for Germany's short-lived colonial empire, and so viewed potential pushes into North Africa as a doorway for colonial gains. The main desire Germany had in supporting Italy is emphasized by Hitler initially forbidding Rommel from undertaking a large-scale offensive and to instead stay defensive around Tripoli. Rommel defied these orders, however, and launched an attack in April. The advance was initially limited, but British weaknesses were exploited and the offensive gained momentum. It ended in Sollum, just over the Egyptian border. As the war continued to progress into its second, then third years, then fourth year, more and more resources were pulled away from the Mediterranean to support the Axis's ongoing campaign in the Soviet Union, further showing the subordinate position of the North Africa campaign in Germany's eyes. After an intense back and forth in the desert, the British eventually gained the upper hand and launched a major offensive in November 1942, sweeping through Libya and threatening the remnant Axis forces in Tunisia. Conjoined with the British success, the United States landed in Vichy French territory in Operation Torch. Roughly 100,000 men in 3 task forces captured ports across French Algeria and Morocco. By the time of the American intervention in North Africa, the theatre's conclusion was right around the corner, and they would only be directly involved for 6 months. From the landings of Operation Torch, November 8th, till the Axis surrender in Tunisia on the 13th of May, their aims were resultingly simple. Finishing off the Axis presence in North Africa was key to relieve pressure off of the Soviet Union, which was locked in devastating combat with Germany and her allies. Capturing the last Vichy French territories would help to secure the Mediterranean, protecting British shipping, Gibraltar and Malta, as well as ease pressure on supply lines. Interestingly, Operation Torch also proved useful in helping to train fresh American recruits by giving them some real combat and operational experience. The US-led force in the west and the British-led force in the east formed a pincer strike against Tunisia, capturing over 250,000 enemy troops as the campaign concluded with an Allied victory. France had an extensive presence in West and North Africa, as well as in the Middle East, but they are generally classed as a spectator in the conflict, rather than an active participant. France itself had been overrun by Germany in 1940, and a collaborationist government was set up, operating out of the spa town of Vichy. Not all of the French army and navy backed this regime, however, and a government in exile was formed, led by Charles de Gaulle. The Free French, as this faction was to become known as, was an active participant in North Africa, but their resources were limited, and so they operated, often in the shadow of Britain. Achieving victories in North Africa was key to the Free French build-up, and seizing Vichy French colonial territory would increase de Gaulle and his movement's political legitimacy, and open up a new pool for recruits and resources to begin potential operations in retaking the French motherland. On the opposite end, the German collaborators in Vichy held a fragile position, trying to prevent their African holdings falling into Axis or Allied hands. Their primary goal was to hold their territory and maintain their autonomy. Propping up this illusion ensured the state maintained a semblance of legitimacy, keeping their territory out of German hands. Vichy France was able to get away with this until the landings of Operation Torch. When Operation Torch hit Algeria and Morocco, their forces initially put up resistance, which was stiff in places such as Casablanca in Morocco and Oran in Algeria. Pushback began to melt away after Admiral Darlan negotiated a ceasefire. After Operation Torch, Germany and Italy dissolved Vichy France on the 11th of November 1942, fully occupying the last of France's non-Allied aligned territory. At the theatre's culmination, the Allies were able to take the crown. Vichy France lost their legitimacy and neutrality as they simply ceased to exist, and Germany was routed from the continent alongside their defeated allies. The grand designs of Italy, Mare Nostrum, Middle Eastern conquest, and a grand continuation of Rome, fizzled away as their last colony was lost, and their position at home looked more and more unstable. Britain kept her naval dominance in the Mediterranean and secured Egypt, East Africa, and kept important supplies flowing through the Suez Canal. The advance was backed up by their American allies, and a victorious Free France getting closer and closer to returning to the European mainland.